So yeah, I feel this is slightly unfair because we had this discussion about revolution, and I now get a kind of extended platform to put my view on it. But basically, the idea of compassionate revolution is about getting at the need for a holistic change, but also taking on.
There's more audience there.
They listen at night, but not in the day. But also taking on one of the central myths of the dominant, like, ecocidal, humanicidal system that we have at the moment, which is that human nature is about competition. We're all basically nasty, and we have to sort of fight like dogs in the kind of the global race, which most people here know already is a race to the bottom. It's about corporations with increasingly kind of fluid international and mobile power, able to play different countries and regions of the world off against each other, so that, the tax rates go down, the employment conditions go down, and things just get worse for everybody. I thought it was a really, really interesting discussion earlier about revolution, and I think a lot of good points were made. But I will repeat one of the points I made earlier, which is I think we really need to understand language, not just in terms of what it might mean to certain kinds of people that we spend time with, but what language means in the wider world, and also understand the context in which people like us are framed and have been framed for many decades, which is as generally kind of angry anti-people that the average person doesn't really know much about, but the impression given by decades of police protester violence, which is framed as a sort of mutual thing, but put largely on the protesters, means that most people never actually get to the message beyond the messenger that is really negatively framed. Revolution, I don't think I need to justify that word because there was no disagreement in the earlier discussion that we need a revolution. That many people know Naomi Klein's "This Changes Everything" narrative, but to cut that fairly long story short, we have a blink of an eye in terms of the time scales that we're working on to radically transform and reverse the momentum of the global political economy. And one of the things I think that means is we simply don't have time to entertain even the possibility of sort of smashing everything and starting again. We have to, as far as I can see it, take what we have that is the product of the blood, sweat and tears of millions of people working incredibly hard and transform it into the system that we need. And I think people are rightly wary of revolution full stop. It's partly because there's a lot of negative propaganda to put people off change, but it's also because when you do have violent revolutions, that stirs up a whole lot of chaos. And as Naomi Klein's, not her most recent book, "This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate," but the shock doctrine, is that makes very clear, we have a power system that is better than ever, feeding off disaster. Essentially, they are positioned to gain enormously from what are massive collective losses. So a war, a hurricane, a tsunami is a perfect excuse to move millions of people out of their homes. The tsunami is one of the most sort of dirty examples that she goes into in the shock doctrine, where the tsunami happened, there was this massive global outpouring of compassion and concern, and the people who were sort of literally driven from their beachside homes, like millions of people in fishing communities, into these kind of hideously concentrated tin shack shelter accommodations. Instead of that money actually going to help those people rebuild their lives, that money essentially went into turning those beaches into like global holiday resorts. And many of those people are still languishing in this hideous temporary accommodation and don't have access to their basic livelihoods. 5 or 10 years, according to the World Bank and the International Energy Agency, of all people, not famous for being radical organisations, 5 or 10 years basically is what we have to get things turning around at a global scale. And in countries like this one, I don't think you appeal to people with a narrative of smashing everything. The problem for most people is not getting them to believe that things need to change massively. The problem is getting people to believe, A, that it's possible, B, that they can be part of it, and C, that it's not going to have terrible consequences. Because because I think we need to be very realistic in the countries like this one, that people know that there are billions that don't have food, water, shelter, etc., and things, increasingly bad though they are for a lot of people in this country, people understand intuitively that things can be a lot worse. So I think a narrative of compassionate revolution is what has the power to give people a sense of their own positive agency, of the different future that we need to move towards. And also, I think that, and I've touched on this, but I think this bears repeating, that violence breeds violence. If you have a violent revolution, that empowers certain kinds of people with certain kinds of strengths that often aren't the people that you most want in place once you've got rid of the old system to bring about the new one. What it also does is bring up a huge amount of kind of really powerful but quite passionate energy, and the word passion and the word passive come from the same root. In both cases, the key point that I want to emphasize here is that they're things that happen to you, and so like massively kind of inflamed passions are really good for shoving what is there at the moment out of the way, but not very good for creating the circumstances where, you know, in an almost historically anomalous way, we work out how to get beyond divide and rule, how to get beyond the People's Front of Judea problem. That anyone who's taken part in some activist circles knows how understandable it is, the way people split off into different cliques and groups based on different framings of the situation that we have, and what that essentially perpetuates is a reality where those of us in our millions who basically agree that things really need to change really quickly, nonetheless can't come together into cohesive whole. And I won't go too much into the sort of spiritual practice side of things, but I think, again, to cut a long story short, we are infested with $3 trillion worth a year globally of public relations, marketing and advertising, and that the prime goal of that is to construct us as these narrow, self-regarding, insecure, anxious, consumerist creatures, and to take that on is about recognizing that there are higher values that are essentially kind of that love basically is the antidote to all that propaganda. Woo! And divide and rule can only work as long as people can be stimulated for all sorts of very justified reasons into opposing other groups and other people. As long as we stick to love as the ultimate compass, we have a chance of moving forward in the way that we need to. And I think ultimately love is a much more stable, long-lasting energy. You know, activist burnout is something we're all aware of. And I think when you're living with anger, there's all sorts of understanding, you know, medically and biologically, of how kind of anger and stress, even though it's powerful in terms of getting things done, like eats you up from the inside, and it's not a sustainable path to change. And we all know that the powers that be will do their very best to avoid, distract, co-opt, hollow out any attempts at change. So the need for a kind of steadiness and forthrightness and ongoing commitment to the change that we need to see is utterly crucial. And you know, just looking at the microcosm of Occupied democracy, like everything that they're doing, and we had it from the horse's mouth from Lord Bates, the Under Secretary of the Home Office. They are policing us to prevent this protest growing. Everything they're doing is about undermining, niggling, breaking morale, etc. So the more we are protected against the tendency to be sucked into a kind of them and us narrative, the more we avoid the trap of making this just about the police, for instance, because the police ultimately are the foot soldiers of the system, and if we get sucked into a narrative where that's the focus, police versus protesters, that distracts from the real issue that we're here for, which is to bring attention to the system. Yeah, that's probably enough for me ranting. I mean, I think, last thing I say is that I think we are at a really, really special time where there is an amazing kind of confluence from all sorts of like areas of human knowledge that tells this story from different but totally coherent perspectives. So what we now understand about neurophysiology and sort of right brain, left brain, and for anyone that knows much about neurophysiology, like, yes, it's simplistic to talk in these terms, but I think generally it really does apply. Roughly speaking, we have two different personalities inhabiting our heads at any one time. Roughly speaking, the left brain is about control and pinning things down, and being secure and protecting from threats. The right brain is kinesthetic, it's connected to the body, it experiences life as a seamless whole. And when you look at things like that, you realise that love is not it's not some sort of hippie idealistic desire. It's an idea that represents a path to the actual reality that we inhabit, which is one where everything is shared, because we have mirror neurons, or empathy neurons as some people call them. We experience the pain of others as if it's our own. You know, you see somebody else suffering, the internal neurophysiological and psycho-emotional experience of that is very similar to if you've suffered that pain yourself. So we are actually in a world where our happiness is linked to everybody else's, where suffering with others, compassion, or being open to others' suffering is maybe a better way to look at it, is the path to bringing about a happier world. That this society is all about making people focus individually and going for sort of individual dreams of happiness, and what of course happens is you get millions of people sort of crashing into each other and feeling deeply frustrated with each other for getting in the way of those kind of idealistic dreams. What love is about is, I mean, as the Dalai Lama put it really succinctly, like altruism makes a hell of a lot more sense than selfishness, because there are a lot more of other people than there are of you, you know. But yeah, so and it's not just neurophysiology, it's sociology. Anyone who's read The Spirit Level, which is actually quite a sort of boring book, there's loads and loads of figures from the OECD and the World Health Organization, etc. But it basically makes the point categorically over and over again that the more equal the society that we're in, the less social problems it suffers. You know, from obesity to all sorts of cancers, to trust in the society, to teenage pregnancy, to like economic stability as well, ironically. Like, you know, unequal economies are really crap economically, because they mean that more and more people are getting into unsustainable debt to pay for things they need. People at the top have too much money, so they invest it in assets, so the assets go, you know, the asset prices inflate ridiculously, so you have inequality, creates this recipe for economic instability and boom and bust. And if we didn't realise this before the economic crisis, hopefully we should now, that, as somebody said, fortunes are made in boom times, but dynasties are made in depressions. This kind of crazy boom-bust cycle works very, very much in the interests of the 1%, because when things go bust, they get rich like never before. Because the price of everything collapses, so they can buy everything up for cheap. You know, the people who've got a few billion in the bank when the economy is in tatters, to buy everything up for cheap, and then of course when things start stabilising again, you know, they've made insane profits on that. So whether it's economically, sociologically, neurophysiologically, etc., there is an increasing understanding that a compassionate, shared focus in terms of how we go about trying to improve the world is one that is just grounded and makes sense. And yeah, so I think a compassionate revolution is essentially what we need. And like I said before, I think it also makes sense internally in terms of how we operate with each other to try and come to solutions that when there are really difficult points that we're passionate about, it's very easy to lose patience and not work through differences, so that we can go from where we are at the moment, which is a mostly shared perspective with lots of the other different groups that generally agree with us, to a platform where we can actually experience a kind of genuine unity and diversity and a kind of genuine experience of common cause. But yeah, so yeah, that's the end of my sort of medium-length rant.
Yay!
But as far as I know, the entertainment isn't here, so we've got time for discussion and questions, and you know, make those questions, you know, however direct you want them to be.